Have you ever walked away from a conversation replaying every word you said, wondering if you said too much or if they misunderstood you? Maybe you caught yourself explaining the same thing again and again, trying to make sure they get it. Over-explaining is one of those habits that usually starts quietly and innocently. You might not even realize you're doing it at first. Maybe someone questions your decision, asks why you didn't show up somewhere, or gives you that doubtful look that makes your stomach twist. And before you know it, you're giving them a full story, every reason, every thought, every step that led you there. You start explaining not just what you did, but why you did it, what you meant, what you didn't mean, and what you wish they would understand. It feels like you're clearing things up, like you're protecting yourself from being misunderstood. But really, what you're doing is defending your right to exist without judgment. Over-explaining isn't about clarity, it's about fear. Fear that someone will think you're rude. Fear that you'll disappoint someone. Fear that silence will make them assume the worst about you. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that your intentions needed to be proven instead of simply lived. And when you live that way, every conversation turns into a performance. Every no becomes a paragraph, and every pause feels like a threat to your image. You start to believe that if you can just explain enough, people will finally see your heart, your effort, your goodness. But the truth is, over-explaining often has nothing to do with the other person. It's about your own discomfort with being misunderstood, because being misunderstood feels like rejection. And rejection, even in small doses, touches something deep inside you that says, I'm not enough unless I convince them. So you keep talking, you keep softening your words, you keep adding context that nobody asked for, hoping it'll protect you. But it doesn't. It just makes you feel smaller, like you're giving pieces of yourself away to earn peace that never comes. Over-explaining becomes a habit of self-erasure, a way to trade your calm for their comfort. And the irony is, the more you explain, the less powerful your words become. The more you justify, the more people start expecting you to. It becomes a cycle that feeds itself, leaving you drained and unheard, even though you said everything you could. Because over-explaining isn't about communication. It's about control, the illusion of it, the kind that whispers, if I explain enough, I can make them see me the way I need them to. Your intent doesn't need permission because your reasons for doing something are not a public debate. Most people get caught in the habit of explaining themselves because they've been taught that every decision needs to be justified to someone. You say no to an invitation, and suddenly you feel like you owe a full itinerary of why you can't make it. You draw a boundary, and guilt creeps in, whispering that you're being cold or selfish. So you start padding your words, softening your tone, trying to make it sound reasonable enough that nobody gets upset. But the more you do that, the more you train yourself to believe that your choices only matter if other people approve of them. You start filtering your own voice through their expectations. You stop trusting your own reasons and start performing your intentions like they need an audience. That's where the exhaustion comes from, living life constantly defending decisions that were never meant to be defended. Your intent belongs to you. It's your inner compass, the quiet truth behind every boundary, every yes, every no. It doesn't need to be decorated, translated, or repackaged for someone else's comfort. When you over-explain your intentions, you start chasing validation instead of standing in clarity. You begin to look for signs that people get you when really the goal was never to be understood by everyone. It was to be at peace with yourself. The irony is, The more you try to prove your good intent, the more it gets lost in the noise of over-justification. You say yes to things you don't want to do because you don't want to seem rude. You stretch yourself thin to look agreeable. You talk in circles trying to protect people's feelings while your own feelings take the hit. But your intent doesn't require their permission slip. You don't owe someone an essay for a simple answer. You don't need to prove that your boundary was set with kindness. Confidence isn't about explaining until everyone agrees with you. It's about knowing that your choices were made with sincerity and letting that be enough. Because the truth is, the moment you start explaining your intent to gain approval, you've already handed over your piece to someone else's opinion. Short answers carry power because they hold the weight of certainty. When you can say something simply and stop there, it tells people that you trust yourself. It tells them you don't need to fill the silence with justifications or soften your truth to be accepted. There's something magnetic about a person who can answer clearly and calmly, who doesn't rush to convince or explain. A short answer draws a line of quiet authority. It says, "I've thought about it, and I'm at peace with my choice." Most people mistake long explanations for clarity, but often they're a form of anxiety dressed up as politeness. We start adding extra words, extra context, extra reasons, because we fear the discomfort of being questioned. We fear the awkward silence that follows a simple no, or the look of disappointment when we don't give the answer someone hoped for. But every extra sentence you add after your truth starts to water down its strength. It's like pouring more and more water into a cup of strong coffee. The flavor fades until it's just bitter and weak. A simple, firm statement doesn't make you harsh. It makes you grounded. The problem is we've been conditioned to believe that brevity equals coldness. That if we don't explain, we must not care. But actually, short answers show a deep sense of self-trust. They show that you believe your intentions speak for themselves. When you can say, "No, thank you," and stop there, it creates space. That space can feel uncomfortable, but it's where your power sits. It's the space where you stop performing and start being. And it's in that silence where people start to listen. Not because you shouted louder or talked longer, but because your words carried a quiet weight that didn't need decoration. The power in short answers is not in what you say, but in what you choose not to add. It's the restraint, the discipline of stopping yourself from softening the truth just to make it easier for others to digest. It's the ability to hold your own words without wrapping them in apologies or over-explanations. Because when you trust your own voice enough to say less, people learn to take your words more seriously, not because you forced them to, but because your confidence made them pay attention. Silence is uncomfortable because it exposes what's real. It leaves no room to hide behind words, no space to control how someone perceives you. That's why so many people rush to fill the silence with explanations, reasons, and reassurance. The moment things go quiet, anxiety starts to whisper that something's wrong, that maybe they're upset, that maybe you should say more to fix it. But silence isn't the enemy, it's a test of confidence. When you stop over-explaining, you start realizing how much energy you've spent trying to manage other people's thoughts. You've been trying to make sure everyone understands, agrees, or stays comfortable, and silence threatens that illusion. It feels like a void that needs to be filled, but in reality, silence is a mirror. It reflects your level of peace with yourself. When you can let a moment breathe without jumping in to justify or clarify, it shows strength. It shows you trust that your words already said enough. It shows that you understand not every question deserves an answer, Not every pause needs to be rescued. The most grounded people know how to hold silence without flinching because they've learned that peace doesn't come from convincing. It comes from stillness. Silence gives your words room to mean something. When you stop talking, people finally have the space to hear what you said. Overexplaining, on the other hand, buries your truth under layers of noise. It's like painting over a clear picture again and again until it loses its shape. The power of silence lies in the courage to let it stand even when your mind screams to fill it. And it's not just about speaking less. It's about learning that your worth isn't tied to how well you can explain yourself. You can make a decision, set a boundary, express a feeling, and then stop. You can let people sit with it, even if they don't like it. That discomfort is not your responsibility to fix. Silence gives you back control, not of others, but of yourself. It teaches patience. It teaches you to be okay with not being immediately understood. Because silence doesn't mean absence, it means presence, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself through words, just through calm. You can't control their perception, no matter how carefully you choose your words or how many times you explain yourself. People don't hear you through your intentions. They hear you through their experiences, their wounds, their insecurities, their beliefs. You could say the same sentence to 10 different people, and each of them will take it differently because they filter it through their own world. That's why overexplaining never really works. It's like trying to paint over someone else's lens while they're still wearing it. You end up exhausting yourself trying to correct how they see you instead of accepting that their perception is theirs to manage, not yours. When you live with the constant need to be understood, you give away your peace every time someone misunderstands you. You start rehearsing conversations in your head, thinking about what you could have said better, how you should have worded it differently, how you might have made them see your side. But no amount of explaining can change someone who doesn't want to understand. Sometimes people don't misinterpret you by accident. They do it because it serves the story they want to tell themselves. And once you realize that, you begin to see how pointless it is to keep defending your heart to people who've already decided what to believe. Overexplaining becomes this desperate attempt to manage something that's completely outside of your control. It's like chasing smoke. You reach for it, you grab at it, but it keeps slipping away. The truth is, the moment you start trying to control someone's perception, you've already handed them power they were never meant to have, because now their reaction dictates your response. Their misunderstanding becomes your burden to fix. You start talking more, apologizing more, overanalyzing more, just to protect an image that was never fully in your control anyway. People see what they're ready to see, and you can't rush that readiness. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to let them misunderstand you and stay silent. It's not arrogance, it's acceptance. It's realizing that clarity isn't about forcing others to see your truth. It's about holding your truth steady even when they don't. Because once you stop chasing how people see you, you start freeing yourself from the exhausting job of proving who you are over and over again. Confidence is clarity, not quantity, because real confidence doesn't need to be dressed up in explanations or backed by long justifications. When you're confident in what you know, what you feel, and what you've chosen, your words naturally become fewer but stronger. You stop talking to convince, and you start talking to communicate. There's a big difference between the two. Convincing comes from fear. It's the urge to be believed, accepted, or validated. Communication comes from calm. It's the desire to express, not to defend. When you overexplain, you start operating from a place of doubt, as if every statement needs backup, as if every decision needs to come with proof. But when you're clear within yourself, you don't need to add weight to your words because they already carry truth. You can say no without trembling. You can say yes without guilt, and you can express your boundaries without a speech attached to them. Confidence has a quiet rhythm to it. It's not loud or defensive, it's steady. It doesn't rush to fill the air when someone questions it. It doesn't panic when it's misunderstood. It simply rests in what it knows. The more certain you are internally, the less you depend on external validation. You stop measuring your worth through reactions. You stop needing to prove that your decisions were made with good intent. And you start realizing that clarity feels far more powerful than being right in every conversation. Confidence doesn't always sound impressive. Sometimes it's just a few words said calmly, followed by silence. That's why confident people can make such an impact. They speak from a place of grounded truth rather than emotional noise. Their clarity becomes the message. When you trust yourself, you don't need to flood every moment with explanations because you're not trying to fill the space where insecurity lives. You've already filled it with self-trust. And self-trust changes everything. It allows you to speak once clearly and let that be enough. You don't chase understanding anymore because you know you were already clear. You don't fear disagreement because clarity doesn't depend on approval. Confidence doesn't show up in how much you say. It shows up in how calmly you can say what's true and stop there without needing to prove it further. Boundaries aren't up for debate because they're not requests for approval. They're declarations of self-respect. The moment you start explaining why you set a boundary, you open the door for someone to argue with it, to challenge it, to make you feel like you need a better reason to protect your own peace. And that's where so many people get stuck. They think setting boundaries means they owe an essay to justify them. You say no, but then you follow it up with a list of reasons, trying to make the no sound polite enough to be accepted. You soften your truth so it won't make anyone uncomfortable. But boundaries aren't supposed to please others. They're supposed to protect you. When you explain too much, you start negotiating your own limits, and before you know it, your boundaries become suggestions instead of standards. You can't build self-respect on constantly needing people to understand your limits before you honor them. Some people will never understand them, and that has nothing to do with your worth. Boundaries are personal, not public. They don't need to be explained because they come from a place of self-awareness that others might not see. You're not being harsh when you say no without explanation. You're being clear. And clarity to people who are used to access and control will always feel like rejection. That's why they'll push back. They'll ask why. I brought you the one. They'll question your tone. They'll try to make you feel guilty for saying what you mean. That's where your strength is tested. Because the moment you start explaining, you start inviting negotiation. You start convincing instead of asserting. You start turning your boundary into a conversation instead of a conclusion. Boundaries are like fences around your peace. They're not walls to keep everyone out, but they are lines that define where you end and someone else begins. They're not meant to make sense to everyone. They're meant to keep you sane. When you can set a boundary calmly without over-explaining or apologizing, you start teaching people how to treat you. You show them that your time, your space, your emotions, and your energy are not open for debate. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes to protect your peace without guilt without tension and without needing anyone to understand why. Practice restraint, not rudeness, because learning to stop over-explaining isn't about shutting people down or cutting them off. It's about choosing your words with intention instead of emotion. Most people think that if they say less, they'll come off as distant or cold, but restraint is actually the purest form of self-control. It's knowing that you don't have to react to every misunderstanding or defend every choice just to keep the peace. It's learning that silence doesn't mean indifference, and brevity doesn't mean arrogance. Restraint is the pause between impulse and response, the moment you decide whether to speak from confidence or from insecurity. When you're used to over-explaining, that pause feels unbearable. Your instinct is to fill the air, to justify, to make sure everyone sees your good intent. But every time you resist that urge, you grow a little stronger. You start realizing that not every question deserves a detailed answer. Not every opinion needs a counterargument. And not every misunderstanding needs to be cleared up right away. Sometimes restraint looks like taking a breath and letting the discomfort sit for a while. It looks like saying what's true and trusting that it's enough. It's understanding that clarity doesn't come from the lengthy of your explanation. It comes from the steadiness of your delivery. Practicing restraint teaches you to protect your emotional energy instead of spending it on endless clarification. It teaches you to respond instead of react, to express instead of defend. There's a calmness that comes with restraint, a quiet kind of authority that doesn't need to shout to be heard. People start noticing that you choose your words carefully and that your silence often says more than your explanations ever could. But it takes discipline. It takes awareness to catch yourself before you start over-talking. It takes courage to stop mid-sentence and realize you've already said enough. Restraint is not about withholding emotion, it's about directing it. It's knowing that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is your ability to stop talking. Because when you practice restraint, you start speaking from peace instead of pressure. And that's when your words begin to carry real weight, not because they're many, but because they're measured. When you stop over-explaining yourself, you stop chasing validation that was never yours to earn. You start realizing that your peace doesn't depend on how well people understand you. It depends on how deeply you understand yourself. Every time you choose silence over justification, every time you say less but mean it more, you build a stronger connection with your own confidence. You stop performing your worth and start living it. Over-explaining might feel like control, but real control comes from knowing when to stop talking and let your truth stand on its own. It's in those moments of calm when you trust your intent and let go of the need to convince that your presence starts to speak louder than your words ever could.